Article 7, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution requires that the state support and maintain an efficient system of public free schools. And while public schools receive funding from the state and in some cases from the federal government, the majority of funds a school district receives come from local property taxes. Now, this might sound simple enough, but the funding of public schools in Texas has been the subject of intense debate for years. In the late 1960s, 2 school districts in San Antonio became the focal point of the school financing debate. Edgewood Independent School District was one of the poorest districts in Texas where property values were low. The neighboring district of Alamo Heights was one of the wealthiest, with high property values. Since each district was funded by local property taxes, the wealthier Alamo Heights district could tax property at a lower rate than the Edgewood district, but still collect more revenue.
So here you have 2 school districts with different kinds of property, different kinds of assessment. But the Edgewood School District, the parents are putting out more effort. They're paying out more money in order to get very little money to fund the public schools, whereas the rich district is putting out less effort and getting a lot of money because they have a lot of property that can be assessed.
Wealthy school districts that have shopping malls and oil wells can tax at a very low rate, a low percentage, and raise a lot of funds to support the public schools. But low-income parts of the state have very little property value, and so those school districts have to tax at a very high percentage in order to be able to fund the schools.
In July of 1968, Demetrio Rodriguez, along with many other parents of Mexican-American students, filed a class action lawsuit in U.S. District Court against the Edgewood Independent School District. The plaintiffs were challenging the state school financing system, arguing the disparities it caused were a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Demetrio Rodriguez, born in San Antonio, was a federal employee at the Kelly Air Force Base, and he enrolled his children in the public schools in Edgewood School District. He was very disappointed with the unequal educational opportunities, including the quality of the facilities, the preparation of the teachers, the dumbed-down curriculum. He urged the lawyers to bring about change that would improve the quality of the education program for his children.
He argued that under the system that existed, which based a certain amount of the aid to school districts on local property taxes, that it violated equal protection of the law because the values of property vary significantly from one district to another. Edgewood was a property-poor district, and consequently Edgewood couldn't raise nearly as much money as a wealthier district like Alamo Heights, which they use for comparison. So his argument was basically that the kids in a property-poor district are not going to get as much money spent on their education as long as it's based on, to some extent, on local property values.
A panel of 3 judges of a U.S. District Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. The panel declared that education was a fundamental constitutional right, and the manner in which Texas was funding its public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
The district court ruled that it was discrimination on the basis of poverty, and that poverty should be considered an important class, a group of people who should not suffer discrimination solely because of their income.
However, the case was appealed, and eventually San Antonio ISD versus Rodriguez made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1973.
The Supreme Court took the case and was puzzled by it and said, we have never spoken to the issue of education and the right to a particular level of education. In a departure from the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the Supreme Court said states don't even have to provide education. And if they do, then the states are not going to be held by the federal Constitution to any particular level of education.
The Supreme Court essentially said that education was not a fundamental right, that education was not one of the rights that was included in the U.S. Constitution. They also disagreed with the notion that wealth was a suspect classification, that the idea that all poor people were being treated differently from wealthy people.
Essentially, the Supreme Court found that local control of education was a long-standing tradition, and that was as the court put it, a rational basis for the legislation, that local districts ought to be able to tax themselves and contribute to their own school districts if they so chose.
In 1985, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or MALDEF, filed another lawsuit on behalf of the Edgewood ISD, Rodriguez, and several other parents. Since the U.S. Supreme Court had already ruled there was no violation of the federal Constitution, the plaintiffs instead claimed the state school financing system violated Article 7, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution. They filed their suit in a Texas district court against Education Commissioner William Kirby.
In the state constitution, education is required at a level that results in the general diffusion of knowledge. So what the lawyers argued for Mr. Rodriguez in state court was, this is a different case than the federal court case. In the federal court case, the Constitution doesn't mention education. In the state court case, that the issue of education is central to the Texas Constitution.
They tended to focus on several aspects of the state constitution and settled on 2 or 3 key ideas in the state constitution. And one of those ideas was that there should be an efficient public school system set up by the state. And then they further defined what efficient would be, and they argued that what the state had right now was not efficient.
In 1987, the district court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. State District Judge Harley Clark ordered the state legislature to develop a more equitable system and have that system ready to go in 2 years. But a 3-judge panel of the Texas Third Court of Appeals later reversed Judge Clark's decision. In 1989, the Edgewood Independent School District and the other plaintiffs appealed to the Texas Supreme Court. The case was Edgewood ISD versus Kirby, and in it, the court had to decide whether or not the state's school financing system violated Article 7, Section 1 of the state's Constitution.
The state made the arguments they had made before. They don't have to provide educations at the state of Texas. These districts don't have to educate anybody. The Texas Supreme Court ruled that, yes, the state does have to educate everyone. It's required by the Constitution. And then required the legislature to reform its funding system so that the education be provided without discrimination and done in a way that was given to all the students. The term written in the 1800s of the general diffusion of knowledge was interpreted in today's language to mean an effective system of education that produced good results for all children in Texas.
The Texas Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of the Edgewood Independent School District and the other plaintiffs. The justices agreed that spending per student varied greatly and that as a result, students in poorer areas had less access to important educational tools and experiences. The court ordered the state legislature to establish a new, more equitable financing system for the following school year.
So the legislature did come up with a very complicated plan that people call Robin Hood, because the districts do have to share, the wealthy districts do have to share the revenue with the districts that are not wealthy. This went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court smiled and said, "Legislature, you've done your job. The Constitution has been met," but then warned the legislature. "But I want you to understand, legislature, that there are some complaints that you have set a cap on how high the tax rate can go. And we may have to come back and look at this issue again."
After the Texas Supreme Court's decision in the Edgewood case, the school financing system in Texas would face more legal hurdles. and the debate over the method by which schools are funded in the state continues to this day.
Do we have a system that is vastly improved from what it was before Demetrio Rodriguez filed? Absolutely, yes. We've closed much of the disparity. But the legislature is still going to have to look at this issue again because 4 new lawsuits were filed in 2012. And so we will still continue to try to provide equal funding and equal opportunities for students in Texas. And the Texas Constitution will continue to protect every single Texan in every part of the state.